Hello everybody, welcome to your first outside of class lesson. Today we're going to be talking about observations and inferences. This ties into our learning target. I can differentiate between observations and inferences. Sometimes these terms are pretty easily confused when we learn science. Both of them turn out are very important to scientists to use them on a day-to-day basis. But it's important to understand that they both serve different purposes when it gets down to it. And if we don't understand what the differences between them are, they can be confused, and sometimes that leads to trouble, and scientists or even lay people can get into all kinds of trouble because of that. Into kind of trouble with the law or anything like that, but sometimes it's easy for other people to misunderstand what we're saying, or sometimes it can take us to incorrect conclusions based on that. So let's start talking about observations. Observations are basically the data that scientists work with. Sometimes these things are what a scientist or what a person might see. Could be what they hear. Could be what they feel. I think you're getting the picture here. These are some of our senses. Could be what they taste. Never in a lab though. And it could be what they smell. And those all tie into our senses. Sometimes we hear we have 5 senses. We actually have more, but those are our 5 primary ones. But sometimes things can't be detected with our regular senses, and we need instruments to help us with that. Some instruments might be something like a thermometer, or a pH meter. I don't know if you've ever used those before. If you've ever had an injury or anything like that and had to go to the ER, you may have had to have an X-ray or even an MRI. Okay, here in biology, we use a lot of microscopes. To help us see some of the things that we can't see with our naked eyes. But all of these things help us collect information about a topic. And then we use that information to draw conclusions. And one other thing before I move on to inferences, and we'll talk about this more later on, but sometimes the information we collect can fall into one of 2 categories. If we're merely describing something, like talking about the color of a rock or the way it feels in our hand, any kind of descriptive information is usually referred to as qualitative information. And I'll write that down and spell this out for you. Because we're talking about some of the qualities of it. Other kinds of data that we collect and other observations that we make give numerical information about it, and that would be quantitative. Okay, and it talks about a quantity, some kind of numerical value. Give an example of that real quick. We can talk about my neighbor next door, Mr. Gale. He and his wife had a baby over the summer, and in the pictures, if you look at Mr. Gale's baby, you can say, wow, that's a big baby. Now, describing it as a big baby talks about a quality that baby has. Okay? A big baby. So it would fall under the qualitative kind of data. If you were to say, or if you were to ask Mr. Gale how much his baby weighed when he was born, you might say, well, Asher was, I think he was 6 pounds, 8 ounces when he was born. And you notice that gives a different kind of picture of what that baby was. It gives some numbers and quantifies how big that baby was. Okay, not to say one way is better than another. Both places or both types of information, both types of data have their place. when it comes to science. It's just important, especially now, to at least be exposed to the different kinds of data that we can collect, qualitative or quantitative. Okay, and I should point out that anytime I'm going through things like this, feel free to pause the video and write down what a question might be and bring that to class with you. That really helps to drive some of the discussion that we can have in class. And I say this all the time, but if you have questions, chances are other people in class have questions as well, and it serves to help everybody out when you ask those. Okay, let's go on to inferences. Inferences are a little bit different. Certainly, at first glance, it might look like inferences and observations are the exact same thing. But as it turns out, they're not, and they serve a different purpose. When we're talking about inferences, the biggest thing about an inference for you to understand is that it interprets information using your background knowledge. Okay, now you can understand pretty easily that two different people obviously have different background knowledge. They could see the same image or experience the same phenomenon, and their background knowledge is going to direct their brains differently. Inferences absolutely rely on how we interpret information using our brain. To illustrate this difference between observation and inference, I'm going to put up an image here. Now, without knowing much else, you could make some observations. The observation you could make is that is a dark object. It's black and kind of a bluish gray color. It's streaked in there. It is glossy. Even though this is an image, if you were to hold a piece of this in your hand, you might say it is glass-like. It's fairly hard. If you were to hit it with a hammer, it may shatter into several pieces. All those things would be observations based on using your senses. Now, somebody with background knowledge that might know their rocks, and yes, this is a kind of rock, they might be able to say, well, that rock was formed by volcanic processes. It's actually magma or lava that has cooled on the surface of the earth. Okay, now that would be an inference because they're using their background knowledge to make a decision, to make a judgment or an interpretation based on some of the observations that they've made. They might go further and say this is a piece of obsidian, or sometimes referred to as volcanic glass. But all of those observations that they made, talking about its color, how it's black or kind of that bluish gray color, it's shiny, it's hard, all of those things tie into that inference that this is a volcanic rock. Okay, now I didn't write any of that stuff down that I talked about. I'm going to put up an image in just a couple seconds here that we'll be able to take a look at, and you can pause this and jot down a couple of your own observations and inferences. So let's take a look. Okay, here we go. This is an image that I'm putting up here. Why don't you take a few moments, pause the video, jot down some of your observations. There we go. O for observation, and I for inference. See if you can come up with 3 observations and 1 inference for what you're seeing right there. Okay, go ahead and pause it. Okay, maybe you noticed as some of your observations that, for starters, we are looking at a bird. Maybe you noticed that the bird pictured here has a gray back. Perhaps you noticed that the bird has a orangish red belly. And maybe you notice that the bird is standing. Okay. Another observation, that we might notice is the bird has a dark head. Definitely darker than the rest of its body. Might notice, if you're very careful, you might notice that the bird's head is tilted. Okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different observations that we've got there. Let's go ahead and start to draw some inferences from this. And again, we have to use our background knowledge for making inferences. My background knowledge is going to be different than yours. Okay, but as I look at this, one of the inferences I can make is just a simple identification on this. This is a bird called an American robin. Okay, now again, my background knowledge tells me that. If you didn't know that, that's okay. Alright, I just might have a little more experience with that than you do. Okay, it appears that this is a male American robin. I can tell that because this bird's dark head. Okay, females don't have dark heads like that, males do. Another inference I can make is, because that bird has its head tilted, is actually looking at the ground, and he is hunting. He's looking for insects or worms on the ground. Okay, but all those things, all of those inferences there are made based on my observations. Okay, none of those things are told to me in the picture. Okay, the picture doesn't tell me it's an American robin, or it doesn't tell me it's a male. It doesn't tell me it's hunting. It tells me it's a bird with a gray back and an orange-red belly. It's standing. It's got a dark head, and its head is tilted. But those observations lead me to making those inferences. Okay, I'm going to put up another picture in just a couple seconds here, and bam, there we go. This is one you're going to do on your own, and be prepared to discuss this in class when we meet next. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is jot down a few observations. I'd say at least 3. You can do more if you're that kind of student, but at least 3. And some inferences for this image. Okay, and we'll talk about this again when we meet. Okay, and just to remind you, and this is the first time we're doing this, just to remind you to pause along the way, jot down any questions you might have, so we can discuss this when we meet again next, which I think is next week, Tuesday, if I'm correct. All right, hopefully you have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Thank you.